Hey there, it's Hurley from Inklipse and welcome to another video. Today I'm going to be sharing a few techniques to use watercolor markers to stamp your images. This can be such a fun and versatile technique, and there are such a wide variety of markers you can use for it. You just want to make sure the markers are water-based and they'll work perfect for this technique. So without further ado, let's get right on into it. Okay, so starting off with this first card here, I'm going to show how to use glitter markers to create a really sparkly watercolor background on a background stamp. So I'm using this Plaid and Nordic set from Holtz, and I'll peel off the background that I want to use, and then I'm going to stick it down to the glass mat. So it's really nice to have this to stick your stamps down to, and it makes a great work surface. So then after I've done that, I'll start my coloring here. And like I said, I'm using the Tonic glitter markers for this, and they're super sparkly, which will be really cool for the watercolor later. Now I'm avoiding the center because I'm gonna put a sentiment there and I want it to really stand out. So I'm just gonna go in with several colors of these glitter markers, and I'm really just kind of scribbling onto the stamp. One thing you want to make sure of when you're using a marker like this marker has a felt tip on it. So when you're using markers like this, you want to make sure that you're holding it sideways, horizontally on your background stamp or whatever image you're using. That way it won't rip or really mess up your nib, and you want to go with a light pressure too, and then your nib will be perfectly safe after. But if you go with a more firm pressure and hold it straight up and down, it could really damage your nib, so be sure you're being careful about that. And also, I didn't overlap the colors too much, because when I added the water in, it'll kind of do the mixing for you. So I'm just finishing off with some yellow here. I used a couple blues and greens, and then a yellow here too, to make it nice and bright in the background. So after I've done that, I'm going to go in here with my little sprayer, and I'll spray that down with some water there. So I gave it 2 or 3 spritzes, and then I'm going to bring in a piece of Bristol cardstock, and I'll place it right down on my background stamp. So like I said, the glass mat really helps. I like having my stamps facing up like this, so I just give it nice pressure and it gives a great stamped image. And I find that Bristol gives the best results with these markers, and I'll use it throughout the whole video. So now I'm stamping down the Leave a Little Sparkle Wherever You Go sentiment. This is from another Holtz Handwritten stamp set, and I'm going to go in here and just stamp it down with some black ink. So I'm doing it in my Misty here because I wanted to make sure that I can stamp it down twice and get a really nice crisp image and not accidentally ruin the background that I just did. So I'll stamp that down there and make sure that it's nice and lined up, and then that finishes off kind of the card here. So I added that onto a top folding card base. I'm keeping it really simple with this, and then I'm just going to finish it off with 2 little strips of silver screen glitter paper from Nuvo on each side of the background. So it really keeps it nice and simple, goes along with the sentiment. And also, I really love this background, but on camera it's really hard to see the glitter, but in real life it's just stunning. Wherever you lay down that marker, it's like pure shimmer on top, and it doesn't come off on your hands. Okay, so for this next example, I'm going to show how to use these water-based markers to stamp down fine line images and then watercolor them in. So I'm going to use this Flower Garden stamp set from Holtz, which has really fine line detailed images. And then I'll go in with these Aqua Flow pens. So these are like a real brush pen, so they're like a real paintbrush, so they're much harder to mess up than a felt tipped pen. And they've also got really concentrated water-based color in there. So you'll see when I color my colors down onto that stamp, I'll bring it over in the Misty and stamp it down. And when you're using your Misty stamping tool, it's really nice because you can do little sections at a time. I'll share more of that later here, but I'm just stamping down the little petals, and then I'll stamp down the tip of the flower as well in a different color. So it's really fun to be able to do that and not really have to mix them on the stamp. So you'll see in the next stamp that I do here, I'm using some different colors of reds. So I'll go in with a darker colored red at the top of the flower, and then at the bottom of the flower, I'll fill it in with kind of a pinkish and lighter red color. So it's really helpful to get shading like this because you can have multiple passes to stamp it down, or if you kind of messed up, you can always redo it as well by going over it with another layer. You can also just do it with one pen, and then I'll share how to get that watercolor look in just a second here. So we're not adding any spray to this at all. So then I'm moving my little paper there up with the magnet, and then I'll stamp down the little stems that come in the set as well. So I'm stamping these down with green markers, and here you can see I'm doing this again where I stamp it down twice. So I'll stamp it down with this lighter green color, and then I'm going to go in and shade a couple areas, add some darker green around it, and then I'll stamp it down again. So here I did this stem in 2 separate layers, and you can see you get a really fun look with that. And then after I stamp that down, I'll move on to the next one. But with this, I'm just gonna go in with that darker color first, and then I'll bring in the lighter color. You can really mix these on the stamp as well. I wanted to share that because they are the real brush, they don't get stained as easily as a felt tip pen does. You just have to wipe it off kind of to the side and it'll clear it right out. So then I'm going to go in with a water brush here after it's a little bit dry from the stamping, and I'm just going to kind of pull out some of that color. There's not too much water in my brush, just enough to kind of pull out a little bit of that line to detail, but keep a lot of the detail in the image so that it's just a really light, faint watercolor. So it just picks up some of those lines and watercolors them out to give some really cool coloring. So it's kind of effortless. You kind of just run your brush over top of everything that you've stamped and you get a really painter-like look, and it gives you kind of a really controlled watercolor too. I know a lot of times I really struggle with getting watercolor effects or making sure that my shading is perfect, and this really helps with that because it gives you a little bit of a darker color wherever the line was, and then when you go into the center of the flower, it turns a little bit lighter. So it gives you that automatic shading. So if you're just starting out in watercolor markers might be a great option for you to do stamping like this and be able to kind of get a really cool colored effect like this. So again, I'm just going into this red flower next and doing the same watercoloring out. Now I also wanted to mention in between a lot of the images, you might see me kind of going off to the side with my brush, and that's either to wipe off excess water or to wipe off excess color too. So if I want to change colors from like that red to the green or to the yellow, you want to make sure you wipe off your brush each time to make sure it's nice and clean. Okay, so now I'll move on into coloring the stems, and I'm doing the same thing for these. I'm just going to kind of drag that color out a little bit and fill in the image. Now with some of these, you want to be careful not to run the water over too many times to kind of mess up that lined image. I kind of just ran my brush over it once and kind of stayed with whatever I got there. So it helps keep some of that detail in the image when you're watercoloring like this. Then I'm going to take one of those other Aqua flows, it's a nice light blue color, and I'll mix it on my glass mat there. Just because I don't want a super concentrated color, I wanted a really light wash of color for the background. So I'll take that blue and I'll kind of mix it all around in the background there. And I leave just a little bit of a white border around each image. So it helps to highlight both of those images, but also create a little bit of interest in the background there instead of leaving it just plain white. So it really helps draw some eyes onto the background as well. And you want to do that when the flowers are fairly dry so nothing really bleeds together, and if it kind of does, you can lift it up a little bit with a cloth or your finger. So I chopped that panel down and added it onto my card base and stamped down the thank you for everything sentiment from the glorious Bouquet stamp set, and I really love how that one turned out. So to finish it off here, I want to share how to get a watercolor effect on a background stamp, but get all those little details in there as well. So I'm using this glorious Bouquet background stamp, and I love this giant floral. It actually comes with its own acrylic block, but I'm just going to use it inside the Misty today so we can capture all those details and be sure to watercolor this whole thing in. So I'll line up my piece down there with this kind of going off the edge a little bit, and I'm going to be using those Aqua flows to watercolor this in. So to do this, I'm just taking those markers, and you can blend them together on your stamp. Like I said, they're not going to really cause too much harm because you can always wipe the brushes off to the side. So then I'll give that a little spray there. I tend to do like one spray because it really gives a nice watercolor look, but it also keeps all that detail in there too. So it just makes it look like you almost hand painted it. So then next I'm going in and kind of filling in some more detail to the stamp with those green leaves there. And I'll just watercolor those in, and then I can add a little bit of a lighter shade as well inside there. So you'll see me go in with a lighter shade and kind of blend that out on some of the leaves. And then I'll go in and I'll spray it once, and then I'm going to stamp that down as well. So when I'm working here, I tend to work from one section to move across the whole background stamp. If you kind of skip around a little bit, it can be a little bit tricky to know exactly where your inked stamp is going and where what you color in is going. So I just tend to kind of move across the stamp as I go. So I'm adding lots of different colors in here. For these sunflowers, I'm adding the yellow color down, and then I'm going to add little dots of brown too. By doing this all in the Misty, I'm able to do each little layer by itself, and none of the colors are really like running into each other on the stamp, which makes it really nice and clean looking. And I can also kind of take my time with each image without having one part dry on the stamp, and then, the other parts are still wet, so you get a really nice blended stamp here. And if I want to solve any mistakes that I might have made, I can always do it again, which is a really another big bonus to use this stamping tool with a background stamp like this. And I also did want to say that I did try this technique a couple times, and I found that Bristol worked the best with these markers. It just really gives the most vibrant look and also really captures all that detail since it's super nice and smooth but accepts those markers really well. But you can also try different watercolor cardstocks if they're a little bit smoother, but I did find that this works really great, so I'll link that cardstock down below. So then I'm going to turn on just a little bit of music so you can finish watching the rest of this coloring, and I'll be back to finish the card. Okay, so to finish off this card, I just went in with my large Tim Holtz and Tonic big shears, and I just went around this image and really quickly cut it out. So I left a little bit of a white border around it, and I find it to be helpful to move your paper instead of your scissors, and use these larger scissors for bigger backgrounds like this. This just helps me get like a smoother line as I go, and helps me cut it out a little bit easier. So once that's all cut out, I'm going to add lots of foam tape onto the back of it and add it right onto an Ocean Mist top folding card base from Gina K Designs. So this is really nice to just finish off the card with a little bit of color here. I'll add that down, and then I'm going to quickly finish it off with a sentiment. So I stamped down the sentiment, "Congrats on your big day," and I cut those out into 2 little strips here and added the congrats on with some foam tape. And that sentiment's from the same set too. So I really love how this one came out with all that fun detail and color, and I love the watercolor look with the markers. Alright, so what did you guys think of those cards we created? I hope you really enjoyed it and learned a little bit more about how to stamp with watercolor markers. And leave a comment down below letting me know which card that we created is your favorite. Also, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a big thumbs up and be sure to click that subscribe button down below so you never miss a crafty video like this one. I'll see you guys very soon in another card making and crafting video. Bye guys!